And now I'd like to introduce our first speaker after the break, Rob Davis from Columbia University. He's going to speak to the theory into practice, Too Cool, and the implementation of meaningful collaborative collection development. So take it away, Rob.
I'm delighted to have this opportunity to speak to you this morning on the complex enterprise with the goofy-sounding name, Too Cool. My brief observations are based on 2 years in the Too Cool trenches as librarian for Slavic, Eurasian, and East European studies at both Columbia and Cornell. What is Too Cool? Well, if you haven't done so already, I would encourage you to take a moment and visit the Too Cool website at toocool.org, because it lays out in detail the objectives and general areas addressed by the Too Cool partnership. I think you'll find that while Too Cool may be radical in a university library context, much of what it seeks to implement is anchored in good old common sense. It seeks efficiencies in all areas of library operations across 2 campuses via topic-specific studies conducted by 10 different committees chaired by Cornell and Columbia Library staff. Can we find better ways to leverage our human and fiscal assets? Are there ways we can integrate cataloging, e-resource management, and digital preservation activities? Can we streamline acquisitions and processing of new materials by making procedures more uniform across the 2 campuses? Are there ways in which we might together pursue joint licensing arrangements with vendors? Can we improve upon the game-changing Borrow Direct interlibrary loan system by further shortening campus-to-campus delivery times? Can we implement reciprocal on-site borrowing privileges for faculty and students? Are there research resources that we can acquire together that we're unable to obtain acting alone? And what are the various legal, technical, fiduciary, and governance issues that we must consider in such a partnership? These are some of the broad issues being investigated and in many ways being acted upon by Too Cool, with the generous support of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and in partnership with Ithaca, with a K, S&R Research. From my perspective, as a librarian involved principally with the acquisition of materials, the most innovative, transformative element of Too Cool concerns the way collections are being developed and serviced. Too Cool seeks to coordinate foreign language collection development across 2 institutions, avoiding duplication, and in so doing create a unified collection of far greater breadth and depth than could be accomplished by either institution alone. Too Cool is also a radical departure from tradition in the area of reference and research support, exploring a variety of collection-specific service models. These are the 2 principal aspects of Too Cool with which I've become intimately familiar and upon which I will focus my remarks. Now, my particular world area encompasses a great swath of global real estate stretching from Siberia through the former Soviet Central Asia, the Caucasus, the Balkans, East Central Europe, the Baltic states, and of course, the vast Russian Republic. I'm responsible for collections in 28 major languages and probably another 60 minority languages of the former Soviet Union. Now, when I entered this field, now a quarter century ago, collection development was a remarkably predictable, perhaps even a little bit boring exercise. You had a network of state-run book chambers. You made your selections off of state-published lists of soon-to-appear books. You then conveyed your selections to one of a handful of Western book dealers officially licensed by the Soviet government. Larger libraries had approval plans with these dealers, and they would do the bulk of the selecting for you based on your collection profile. Publishing was heavily subsidized to the state, so prices were dirt cheap. The most interesting non-commercial materials came via exchange relations with literally hundreds of academic institutions throughout Eastern Europe and Central Asia. A single North American university press monograph, priced in hard currency, brought you a boatload of such interesting publications. Under such circumstances, there was little incentive for American libraries to work cooperatively. Who cared if Princeton, Columbia, and NYPL had the same Russian title on shelf? As institutions were often competing against one another for federal support of their area studies collections, a Cold War missile gap mentality crept into our collective consciousness, and sometimes volume seemed to trump quality. To be sure, there was discussion of cooperation, and efforts such as the RLG Conspectus to see who was collecting what were undertaken, but little done to truly coordinate and collaborate. Certainly none of the cooperative collection development initiatives had any teeth or procedures to monitor compliance. And to be fair, this was all pre-borrow direct, pre-scanning, and traditional ILL was a bit clunky. Since the political collapse of Eastern Europe, the life of the Slavic and East European library specialist has become much more complex. Centralized book publishing, collection and distribution systems imploded. Gifts and exchanges departments went the way of the dodo, and besides, the partners on the other end began to want cash, not subscriptions to Scientific American. The old system was gradually replaced by a huge network of in-country and out-of-country vendors. Each newly independent country developed a vibrant publishing scene, generating far more material than before the fall of communism. As for pricing, say goodbye monopoly money, hello euro for some, and currency convertibility for all. Across the board, prices throughout the region are now comparable to the Western market. Shipping costs, once heavily subsidized by communist governments, have skyrocketed, and for many of the regions I deal with, can be as much as a third of the value of the books themselves. In short, while these geopolitical and economic changes have undeniably been for the good, for those of us who collect such materials in the West, they have significantly eroded our buying power and made acquisition routines far more complex. On top of all this, add the expense of a growing number of area-specific e-database products, as well as the plethora of demands placed on library budgets generally. Clearly, we cannot, as individual institutions, do justice to what is available. One can therefore understand why someone in my position would be so eager to embrace a project like Too Cool. Alas, not everyone in my field sees it that way. I was at a meeting of other East Coast Slavic librarians up at Dartmouth College, right around the time of the first formal Too Cool announcement. A colleague from another library, now retired, publicly predicted that Too Cool would sound the death knell of Slavic librarianship, and that I was holding the dirty shovel beside the gravesite. Following the actual implementation of Too Cool Slavic in the fall of 2010, I was attending the annual Slavic and East European Studies Conference in Boston and was bombarded by library colleagues with questions. Some reported, not surprisingly, that their administrations were keenly interested in the progress of the project. Most were simply curious about the what and how of the process. Some were downright hostile in a very ad hominem way. The names Quisling, Judas, Benedict Arnold were muttered by some. One longtime colleague wished me good luck, but I hope for our sake you fail, she said. With 2 years of Too Cool in practice behind me, I can assure you that Too Cool is not the number of the beast. It has not ushered in the apocalyptic end time for Slavic librarianship, quite the opposite. In my humble opinion, it is ushering in a renaissance by significantly broadening and deepening the range of materials available to audiences in Ithaca, NYC, and via Borrow Direct and traditional ILL, far beyond. At a time when other institutions have dramatically, and in some cases indiscriminately, slashed acquisition and staffing in general, and for foreign language collections in particular, bold new initiatives aimed at expanding the research resource base need to be embraced, not shunned. I've discussed now the why. Let's turn to the how of implementing Too Cool Slavic. As we started the process, we wrestled with 2 core questions. Could collection development be successfully coordinated at these historic collections across a number of languages, avoiding duplication, while maintaining relevance and utility to the mix of faculty and students at both universities? And, perhaps most controversially, could one individual, me, satisfy the reference and research needs of 2 campuses that are 4 hours apart? We approach these issues very carefully, embarking on a lengthy period of self-study and then gradual implementation, which may be divided into 7 often overlapping phases. Phase 1, the collections. Columbia and Cornell's Slavic and East European collections are among the largest and most historic in the West. Their combined Russian holdings, and taking into account overlap, are the 3rd largest in North America, behind only Harvard and LC. Both have substantial acquisitions budgets. Before we discuss specific models for collaborative work in the Slavic area, we gathered and analyzed data on both collections as they stood in the winter of 2009-2010. Historic strengths, weaknesses, approval vendors used, serial subscriptions, existing collection profiles, etc. We looked at data for both the 2 Cool partners and beyond in the Borrow Direct universe for the sake of comparison, so we had a solid understanding where we intersect and could effectively collaborate. Phase 2, faculty involvement. This phase, I think, was ultimately the linchpin to the overall ultimate success of Too Cool Slavic. We began by surveying and assessing current faculty and curricular needs on both campuses based on faculty profiles at both institutions. The next step was to travel to Ithaca and conduct a series of one-on-one meetings with faculty. Needless to say, when I arrived on campus, I encountered a high degree of skepticism. Cornell's longtime Slavic and East European bibliographer had retired the previous summer in the midst of a hiring freeze. The impact of both endowment declines and reduction in state aid — Cornell, of course, is a hybrid private-public university — had already impacted programs across campus. Our conversations were taking place during some of the darkest days of the recession, so faculty were expecting the worst. In our discussions, I explained that this was not a pretext or a prelude to acquisitions budget cutting, and that yes, while Cornell would be losing an on-site presence, that I would be responsive and helpful to their concerns and research needs. I think that these conversations helped to assuage some of their concerns and minimally enabled them to put a name to a face, such as it is. Phase 3, getting to know Cornell Library colleagues and practices. As I mentioned, one of the avenues under exploration presently is greater continuity between acquisitions procedures and practices across the two libraries. However, in the near term, we're dealing with two separate sets of procedures, reporting and approval chains, and automated library systems. So my early visits to Cornell involved spending time with technical services and processing staff to learn the ropes. At the same time, library staff from Cornell came to New York City to view our operations and procedures. There are, of course, many differences. For example, Columbia, we have an approval plan with Yankee and Harasowitz for English and Western European language materials about my region, while Cornell uses OCLC selection. I had the opportunity to meet with the talented frontline reference desk staff who handle a majority of undergraduate reference inquiries, including in my area, and to discuss how and when to direct students and faculty to me. Phase 4, develop common approval profiles and checks and balances. Based on our study of the collections and interviews with faculty, we identified core languages to be collected in common, namely the Baltic languages, Belarusian, Bosnian, Bulgarian, Croatian, Czech, Hungarian, Macedonian, Polish, Romanian, Russian, Serbian, Slovenian, Slovak, and Ukrainian. Languages of both historic strength and current campus interest in both cases. Since our goal was to build collections that are broad and deep and that do not duplicate one another, the next step was to harmonize approval vendors across both campuses. In some cases, for some languages, this was not an issue as we already were using the same vendor. In others, old vendors had to be replaced and the new common vendor had to be informed as to what we wanted and how we proposed it would work. We conveyed the specific details of who should be notified of the content of shipments, when consolidated financial reports were due, and so forth. In essence, the checks and balances needed to inform Columbia and Cornell as to what was coming, when, and for how much. Once this was accomplished, we took the data gathered in phases 1 and 2 and distilled it into a common approval plan. By language, each plan had certain common subject areas with an indication as to the depth we wished to build this collection on each campus. So, for example, we wanted a representational selection of current imprints about ecological issues in Slovenia, say, while Columbia wanted a comprehensive collection of the latest imprints on Slovenian history. Specific areas of more narrow faculty interest were incorporated as well. There's one professor at Cornell whose specialty is the Burgenland Croats, who are a very small group within Austria. A critical question we faced was who determines which title goes where? What do we do for areas, Russian literature, for example, where there's an intensive faculty interest on 2 campuses? Ultimately, this has required a great leap of faith. Thankfully, I'm a man of faith. One must feel confident enough in a vendor to trust them to distribute materials equitably to both institutions so that you don't end up with, say, all 19th century Russian literature on one campus and all 20th century on the other. It's like that team building exercise of closing your eyes and allowing yourself to fall backwards, sure in the knowledge that a colleague will catch you. This act of faith is possible in part because I have, in most cases, 2 decades of experience with these vendors. I know them personally. I visited their operations in country. I regularly discuss their performance, or lack thereof, with library colleagues at other institutions. Furthermore, monitoring mechanisms are built into our agreements. I see what Cornell gets electronically, and I get additional feedback from technical services colleagues in Ithaca when there's a perceived problem. Also, we explicitly state in all our pronouncements to faculty that if You want something in the collections at Columbia that was sent to Cornell, we will firm order it. Keep in mind that the no duplication guideline does not pertain to English language works, so the basic tools for initial discovery by students are immediately accessible on both campuses. Phase 5, allocate acquisitions funding. Between Columbia and Cornell, we're talking about a significant chunk of change, certainly one of the largest budgets for my area in North America. Once I receive budgetary information from the two administrations, I allocate each institution's funds separately and inform our vendors the dollar ceilings for fiscal year shipments to each institution. These figures are arrived at in part on the basis of my experience. I could allocate, for example, $20,000 at each institution for Hungarian materials, but I know that would be unrealistic based on the publishing output and per unit pricing of the Hungarian book market. I also keep a certain amount of my annual allocations unallocated to provide me with a kind of flexibility needed to make opportunity purchases, such as rare book or archival collections, or new e-resources that come on the market. Phase 6, quid pro quo, costing it all out. Some elements of the overall too-cool relationship are purely a matter of aligning policy. Other areas, such as my own, where services are provided by one of the partners to the other, are governed by formal contracts. So, for example, Cornell provides Columbia with cataloging support for, I believe, Turkish language materials on a contractual basis. I confess, I kept my distance from this part of the process, leaving it to the respective AULs to work it out. I provide data as to my likely time input, student assistant staffing needs, and so forth, and let them work out the details. Finally, phase 7, communicate, communicate, communicate. I can't emphasize enough just how important communication has been throughout this process. You're asking people, faculty, students, library colleagues, to take their own leap of faith. Cornell faculty and staff must be comfortable with me as a professional and not feel that I would do anything inimical to Cornell's interests. They must know that, although I'm 228 miles away, I'm always eager for their questions and concerns via email, phone, or Skype. And when I'm in Ithaca each semester, I have informed them ahead of time and seek them out in their offices. The Columbia faculty and my colleagues in area studies must be satisfied with the level of attention given to collections and clienteles at home. I regularly send out mass informational emails to faculty and students at both institutions, and I issue a Too Cool newsletter 3 times a year, highlighting significant acquisitions and e-resources across the 2 campuses. This has been absolutely critical for success. So, after 2 years of Too Cooling for Slavic and East European studies, what are the concrete achievements? In the area of collection development, there has been a dramatic reduction of duplication rates between Cornell and Columbia. By way of example, in OCLC for Russian imprints dated 2008, that is before the implementation of Slavic Too Cool, Columbia and Cornell had a 14% duplication rate. Based on what we spent individually on Russian imprints that year, that duplication rate represents about $20,000 worth of funds that could have productively been spent on something else. For 2011 imprints, drum roll please, that figure is 1.6%. And there the duplication comes primarily in the form of non-circulating reference sets. For Hungarian, duplication rates went from 4% to 0.4%. Serbian duplication rates went down from 13% to 0%. Bottom line, collectively, we're getting more diverse material into the hands of researchers than we would have with the status quo. Been told to wrap it up. In evaluating the success of the Too Cool Slavic public service model, last fall a survey was conducted among Cornell faculty, essentially a referendum on me, and needless to say, I had a few sleepless nights in anticipation. But when the results were tallied, the conclusion was, to paraphrase Sally Field accepting the Oscar for Norma Ray, they really like me. In large measure and in all humility, they were happy with me because I strive so hard to keep them informed, solicit their input on new databases and antiquarian purchases, and respond with alacrity to their requests for reference assistance or firm order acquisitions. Just very briefly, this is maybe Too Cool Slavic is the first world area into the breach, but it is not the last. My South Asian colleagues, my Latin American colleague, we're all going to be involved in our own Too Cool model. And the nice thing about Too Cool is that it's not one size fits all. Every Too Cool program is adapted to the specific needs of the faculties, of the collections, and we're exploring different models for each of those areas. And finally, I would say that it has had a positive impact beyond Cornell and Columbia, in that we are working very closely with, for example, our colleagues at Princeton and NYPL to pursue our own kind of mini Too Cool for some areas, for Polish, for example, for Czech. So Too Cool has been a success. I'm a believer. I've drunk the Reverend Jim's Kool-Aid, and and it is having a positive impact beyond the Ithaca and NYC. So with that, you can put away your cards. Thank you. I'll take questions, whatever. Yes.
Hello, just a quick question. In terms of your catalog, if you're moving really to a one collection model for these things, how does a researcher at one campus, what does the catalog record show for on shelf for the item? And how is the item accessed by researchers at the other campus? Is it moved through the interlibrary loan office or another way? And where does it live when it is returned? Does it stay there or does it come back to Columbia in reverse?
That is something that is being worked on by another committee. The idea is that when you would look at the computer screen with Clio, if it was available at Cornell, you would see it on screen. I believe we're using Borrow Direct as the principal delivery method, and that we still have the notion of ownership. So once it was returned, it would go back to Ithaca, I believe, but to be continued.
I'm just curious in terms of collection development, where you see a collaborative arrangement with Cornell that, if I understood correctly, I mean, I'm just going to choose two fields out of my head. I don't remember the ones you mentioned. That Cornell will collect all the Ukrainian material, and Columbia will collect all the Belarus material. How does that work in terms of people at Cornell who need Belarus material and don't feel like waiting? I don't know how long it takes. I mean, that there's nothing in their library in that field.
Well, that actually, it's the opposite. It's shared. So we have a common approval plan. You mentioned Ukraine. We have a common approval plan for Ukrainian materials. These are the subjects in which Cornell and Columbia are interested. We put it on the vendor to say, okay, this is going to Cornell, this is going to. So it's not as if everything is going to one or the other. It's a different model than
And
that.
the same thing with vendors. I mean, you may know all the vendors today, but it's quicksand vendors, you know. They're, you know, what do you do 5 years from now? And you don't know the vendors so well. And putting trust in people you don't know is,
Well,
you know.
this was more the case around 1991, 92, where everything was changing, and you had 60 different vendors, and they'd be gone the next day. But the vendors we're using have track records that go back a number of years now. So if one goes down, there's a range of other vendors that one could turn to fill
And
the
now
gap.
just one thing regarding my own library, which is the Yale Library. I'm sure you know Tanya Lorkovich. I'm just wondering, Yale is also in the vicinity of this greater metropolitan area, closer than Cornell. And I'm just curious, has Yale been involved in any of this? We have a fabulous Slavic
well, one
collection.
thing that you didn't let me get to in this was that
Time is precious.
was that I have also met with my colleagues, my counterparts, Tanya, of course, Brad Schaffner at Harvard, to discuss ways in which the three of us, who are really the largest collections of our kind on the East Coast, you know, could do that. And also Ellen Hamilton, I've been in touch with her as well. So,
Hammond or Hamilton?
I'm sorry?
Ellen Hammond or Hamilton?
Hammond, I'm sorry. So we are moving in that direction.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to invite the speakers from the Smithsonian Institution up to the panel. And they are Douglas Dunlop, David Kaufman, Brian Soldo, Aaron Thomas, and Mary Augusta Thomas.
It's actually good afternoon. Don't worry. We are going to just keep running this as a nice background. Some of you probably have heard some of us do this kind of thing before. We like pretty pictures. We're really into pretty pictures, so if you missed it, you'll get a chance to see it again. It's just going to keep flipping. I'm Mary Augusta Thomas. I'm the Deputy Director at Smithsonian Libraries. And my pleasure today is to come along with my colleagues who really do all the work while they explain how we are taking our first toddling steps towards trying to do some knowledge management with what the Smithsonian knows. Now, on my way, I grabbed the traditional means of doing a paper, a notebook, of course, and I'm writing my notes. It was a leftover from a conference we had called The Era of Experiments and the Age of Wonder. This pretty well sums up what's going on for us. The experiments are constant and the wonder is wondrous at times. The Smithsonian, how many of you know, of course, how many of you have been here, been to the institution? All right, so I don't have to quite tell you all about it. Do I just hit that again? Doug, come fix this. While I keep talking, I'm not even going to worry about it. I learned years ago you don't do that. But you probably know, we have 19 museums. The 20th is being built. We have 20 libraries in our system. They are all part of one system. They all report centrally. They, in fact, report mostly to me. We have shared services. We have been embedded since the beginning. Those 20 libraries are in about 40 locations. That goes from Panama to New York City and sort of to Boston historically. We are a very big, complex institution. Technically, we're probably the world's largest museum complex. We're certainly, at the moment, the world's largest museum library when you take all of our holdings together. And none of this is organized in any way, shape, or form that makes knowledge management an easy thing to do. So for our new academic model, what we're going to try and do is some basic level work across our system to share information with each other and with our museum colleagues. We think we are probably one of the better organizations at the institution to tackle this, because we are one of the few that is pan-institutional. There's a library, as I said, in every one of the museums and research institutes. We are also, just by nature, learners. The whole institution is, the entire institution is trying to get the word out that we are constantly engaged in learning among ourselves and with you and our visitors and our constituents. We're trying to, as the internal phrase has it, excite the learning in everyone, not our brand, just our sense of ourselves. We support the research mission of the institution. We want to help people do what they do better and easier. You can pick these back up at some point. We also want to share our SI knowledge and resources with our outside constituents. We have the institution has 30 million visitors a year. The Smithsonian Libraries has about 10,000 who come to use our collections. All of our libraries are in fact open to people to be used, and we have millions more who come to us online. It's a very complex picture. So what we're going to do in our time is Doug, Aaron, Brian, and David are going to tell you how we took a small step forward in this within the last year and give you some where we're going forward. The reason I'm saying small step is because the Smithsonian has 137 million objects, 2 million books, 600,000 feet of archives, etc. We do not have a common vocabulary. Each museum and research institute exists on its own as far as its academic work. There are some common administrative things, but in fact, pretty much everyone's a self-defined organization, extraordinarily historical, as you probably know. Institution goes back about 160 some years. We are going to have to be creative in how we do this. People do not normally, or have not in the past, shared very easily, simply because they have their own interests. So we're coming into an environment where we are trying to help our colleagues figure out a few of the ways they can work together. Because in our own strategic plan, we want to connect people, we want to collaborate, we want to discover. These are all pretty typical sorts of things. We want to share. Following on us having a plan, and you'll hear more about that, the Smithsonian did theirs. Now the Smithsonian wants to explore the universe. They want to understand biodiversity. They want to value world cultures, and they want to understand the American experience. This is not a small challenge. In fact, we call these the 4 grand challenges. The really deep challenge here will be for all of us to work across our more traditional American history, natural history, Freer and Sackler, museum guidelines. Panama does tropical research. Maryland does tropical research. They each do their own. So with that, I am going to turn it over to my colleagues to start telling you more in depth about what we plan to do in knowledge management.
My name is Erin Thomas, and I'm a digital librarian at the Smithsonian Libraries. And like Mary Augusta was saying, service is really central to everything that we do. It motivates all of our projects. All of our projects are based on improving services or adding additional innovative layers to services. So much so, the strategic plan that she mentioned earlier is called Focus on Service. And it's got, it has, features sentences like, the libraries connect users to people, information, and programs. The libraries makes areas of expertise more accessible. The Smithsonian Institution Libraries fosters interdisciplinary research. So it's got words like connecting, discovering, building expertise riddled throughout it. And all of this to us sort of just read like a blueprint for knowledge management activities, making it pretty obvious that knowledge management was a natural area for the libraries to build our projects around. Not to mention that we are also pan-institutional, so we had, we were one of the few units within the institution that had reach to all of the other players across the institution. So we began thinking about knowledge management at both the institution and at the libraries, thinking about how we could highlight existing operations while not creating new layers of operations. just wondering how we could best improve services while remaining as unobtrusive as possible. The important points were that we were aiming for achievable goals. We needed to create projects that could improve our services according to the institution's vision as well as the library's vision. But traditional KM or knowledge management activities were a non-starter. We weren't going to spend a bunch of cash up front to develop a new system and then tell our colleagues and staff to start using that system whenever they were already used to working the way that they work. So we had to start really low-key, really small and really agile. One of the first things we did was at a Folklife Festival, which, if you don't know, briefly, it's a festival that the Smithsonian puts on every year on the Mall, and it highlights different cultures. And last year, one of the different cultures that was highlighted was the Smithsonian at a place with a theme called the Smithsonian Inside Out. So that gave an opportunity for a lot of different researchers to come and have booths and to talk about what they were researching. And the libraries thought that this was a really good opportunity for us to, go tap on the shoulders and talk to all of our different colleagues and find out what they were researching. And we did. We met with, everyone who was there. They were all really, interested and eager to talk to us. They were all interested in sharing what they were researching about. So we were able to, again, really small, just collect a really small data set about what our colleagues are researching, how long they've been at the Smithsonian, just like really simple questions like that. So that was pretty successful. So again, knowledge management are the efforts that, our knowledge management efforts, again, still needs to be really small. But again, we were still thinking about, how to do more with that beyond just our one-off at the Folklife Festival. So we started thinking in terms of a possible internship. And Doug's going to talk about that.
Well, thank you, Erin. My name is Doug Dunlop. I work in metadata at the Smithsonian Libraries. And first, oh, you can't hear me? Sorry about that.
Same.
Okay, I'll kind of go in the mic here. So first, when we were first thinking about the internship and what it could accomplish, we felt that the interns could survey the information landscape at the libraries and throughout the institution with a fresh set of eyes, and they could give the time and focus that we were not able to devote. We also felt that the internship itself was achievable as a goal for the library to help with the current KM or knowledge sharing activities within the institution if such already existed. We also thought that it was a more cost-effective way of tackling the question of knowledge management in more of a grassroots effort that did not require a high-cost system or a third-party vendor. And additionally, we thought that David and Brian could help with the identification of current resources within the library and across the institution that could help everyone work better without placing another process into the already existing system. So we didn't want to add. We wanted to use what was already there. We also wanted the internship to provide as an outcome something that could demonstrate SIL's ability to connect information needs and wants. And we also knew that we could not provide the collaborative tools the library's institution needed without first knowing what everybody was already working on. Since it is often the case that two or more groups are working on similar projects without knowing what the other is doing. So we wanted to find a way to resolve this problem and win the day. And with that said, we initially, one desired outcome of the internship was an overall KM tool for the collection and discovery of shared areas of interest and expertise, so as to reduce our duplicate efforts that already existed and to connect like-minded researchers and facilitate more of a collaborative network within the libraries and within the Smithsonian Institution. And to achieve this goal, we wanted David and Brian to survey existing services and knowledge sharing vulnerabilities, both within the libraries and also within the institution. We also wanted something useful for both the libraries and the institution to show as a proof of concept. We felt that this was a good goal because collaborative opportunities were not fully being taken advantage of. And collaboration was becoming more important institutionally, as Mary said earlier, with grand challenges. We also felt that the project fit well into the existing SIL strategic plan, which included initiatives to position SIL as a center for research, and also to develop a web of SI research and that fosters interactive research networks. And in order to achieve this, we felt like we could help create and maintain profiles of SIL core user groups and their typical, with their typical characteristics, lights, and needs, with a focus on known areas of research. Now, regarding the library's position within the Smithsonian, we felt that the library was in a good position as an embedded pan-institutional unit to provide a viable solution and could harness the institutional sea changes which are putting increased focus on collaboration. We also knew that we had the tools and resources that were at our disposal, like the Smithsonian Research Online and our institutional repository. And additionally, we knew that we were well positioned to work with other units like the Smithsonian Archives, the Central Information Office, and the Office of Fellowships and Interns, all of which in their own way collect and provide information, and in some cases maintain collection and asset management systems. And regarding the outcome of the internship itself, initially we thought we could have a data set and tool as the outcome deliverable, but that concept quickly evolved, as David and Brian will shortly discuss. We felt that the internship was the first step towards developing a knowledge sharing or knowledge management system for SIL that could possibly scale institutionally. And with this in mind, the intern project initially had 3 stages. First, survey the landscape and see what the knowledge sharing possibilities and potential data sets SIL already has. Second, identify gaps between the data we currently have and existing best practices and standards. And finally, create specifications that can be used to build a KM tool and create a test bed of data using existing data. And as you'll find out, the internship itself quickly evolved from that. And I'll pass it on to David Braun at this point.
Hey, I'm Brian Soldo, and this is David Kaufman. We were the internship team. We were both LIS students, graduate students at the time. I was at Pratt, and where were you?
I was at the University of Maryland.
And basically, we came in and were sort of given this kind of daunting task of doing 2 things, which one was to familiarize ourselves with the institutional culture of the Smithsonian, which is massive, and the knowledge culture that exists there. And 2, being LIS students, we know about knowledge and how to handle knowledge, but not necessarily the term knowledge management, which sort of comes out of corporate culture. So we set to really sitting down and almost writing a literature review on knowledge management, what it's been, what it has the potential to be, what has worked and what has not worked at other institutions.
Yeah, so as we explored the topic of knowledge management, actually, I think Aaron later on is going to talk about how if you discuss knowledge management with people in your organization, you might not want to use the term knowledge management. Excuse me. So knowledge management became popular in the 90s as corporate managers became concerned about getting efficiency from their knowledge workers in their knowledge economy, and people were concerned with questions like, how do we know what we know, and how can we make sure that everyone knows what they need to know? And so the billions of dollars were spent on complex document management systems that imposed work processes on employees, had no incentive to participate, because what makes us valuable and unique is often what we know that other people don't know. And so the idea was that people would file reports and dump knowledge into vast repositories, and somehow through magic everyone would have the same vocabulary and know where everything was going.
And actually use the system.
Yeah, and then and actually put stuff into it and then know what's in it. And as librarians know, people don't always classify information in the same ways. Needless to say, customers were dissatisfied and money and time were wasted. And knowledge management has I'd say evolved. It's now more focused on culture, management, and leadership, and getting workers to value and pursue sharing. And in fact, at IBM, where it's a big deal, the term knowledge management has been cast aside in favor of knowledge sharing. And now it focuses more on communication and collaboration tools, such as special social media tools for corporations, sort of enterprise 2.0, like Facebook for corporations, and Chatter and Yammer are examples of products that sometimes people use. And so it's sort of like knowledge on demand. Like you don't need to know where the information, well, you need to know where the person who has the information is, or you need to put out a request for information, and the person that has it will answer it for you. And so those are the dominant sort of areas for knowledge management, and we rejected those for the Smithsonian Institution libraries. Those are culture-changing endeavors, and though the library is pan-institutional, we didn't feel that it's not positioned to influence how people work minute to minute in that way. So we put those aside.
So what we did come up with, and we came up with basically two suggestions for the baby steps. The cornerstone in building a foundation for a knowledge management system, which of course was not to be called a knowledge management system. And one of the biggest problem that we identified is and from the strategic plan, is this idea of expertise location. The fact that there are so many disparate units and the institution is so large, we wanted to make it easier for people to find the expertise that they were looking for. The grand challenges are interdisciplinary, and they come with grant money. So there's an incentive for people in different museums and research centers to collaborate on an interdisciplinary project. But in order to do that, in order to facilitate that, you need to be able to find people that maybe can work on similar ideas. So we looked at, again, enterprise solutions, but that was kind of not really possible. So we wanted to look at what was possible within the existing cyber infrastructure at Smithsonian, within the existing culture. And we learned by talking to OCIO, which is the IT unit at Smithsonian, that they were rolling out a new staff directory that had the capability to include expertise. Unfortunately, OCIO wanted people to just populate their own. And most people are not going to do that. So we actually sat down and talked to them about creating a taxonomy of expertise. And expertise can go anywhere from the research level to the paraprofessional level to the administrative level. Who's good at booking conference rooms, stuff like that. So we basically suggested that SIL take the lead in creating a taxonomy of expertise that would be pre-populated as an employee came in the staff directory, create a real robust staff directory. And that they coordinate the project, investigate units and lists of expertise. Some units already had taxonomies of expertise, and compile working job titles. These are federal jobs, so your job as it exists at the federal level is not necessarily what your job is.
Yeah, like in the HR database will say something, will describe you in a way that has nothing to do with what you do.
So the ultimate goal being a taxonomy of expertise within the staff directory. And we also took a look at org charts. David compiled, there's a massive org chart of how the Smithsonian is structured, and then it goes down and down and down to the unit level, to the subunit level. So there's no real map of that. There's no real map of the structure of the institution.
It was an imaginary org chart. We made it.
Yeah.
We made it.
So what we did was we created a sort of interactive one where you could actually click into each square of each unit and then click, click, click down to kind of get a real visual of how the organization really functions and who the person you would go to is. And that's something that we suggested be maintained and updated as the organizational structure changes and as people move in and out of jobs.
Mm-hmm. And that was based on interviews with people who were new, and they described they just could not understand where they were at all.
What we were continually told was that it takes 2 years for you, a new employee, to really get a sense of the institution.
Yes, I can attest to that.
I'm in my 3rd year at the institution. I can attest to that as well.
So you've now mastered it. Should I go on to the next area?
Next.
So the other area of knowledge management that we decided that the SIL should pursue is knowledge retention, which has become prominent in some organizations thanks to concern about the brain drain caused by sort of the massive retiring of the baby boomer generation, and which is a situation that is also being confronted, that the Smithsonian is also confronting. And so an example of an organization that prioritizes knowledge retention is the power company, the Tennessee Valley Authority. They have a huge, complex, and critical infrastructure, and it's managed by an aging workforce. So they wanted to know, are we going to not know how to turn these, tomorrow someone's going to retire and not know how to fix something or, turn something on? So they started by, they created a risk calculation for, knowledge. They measured how important certain knowledge was and how likely it was that the person who has it is going to retire soon. And so they figured out how they could order who to interview, and they looked at ways of organizing that information. So we interviewed 2 retiring knowledge workers at Smithsonian, a librarian and a researcher, to test that process and to try to assess their risk. And we discussed their work processes, and we uncovered several areas for both folks who were of unique knowledge that they were in the sole possession of, and they hadn't really considered how that information, that knowledge, might be retained after they had left. So we decided that maybe this was an area that the Smithsonian should pursue. But it's also not something that you can just sort of, someone's thinking about retiring, they've got a couple months left, let's start, writing down, following them around and scribbling stuff down. It's about having a collaborative work environment and having people value sharing with each other so that there's redundancy or there's an understanding of what each other is doing. And then but it also can be formalized more seriously because it's important, because people, you can take it with you.
Mm-hmm. That's it. Okay. Doug is going to wrap up. Erin's going to do that.
Well, there's not much to wrap up. This was, I think, a very successful internship for sure. One of the results was a paper that was written sort of outlining key places to continue to investigate. And those were the knowledge retention and expertise location, and we're continuing with projects in those tasks. The libraries and the institution are definitely collaboration centered, and the libraries continue to seek out ways in which we can bring our unique expertise to other collaborations. Like, I think that there was a quote I read recently from the secretary that said something about the ideal collaboration being 2 partners that provide something that the other cannot. And I think what the libraries has to offer is definitely something that other partners will definitely, benefit from.
And I might add that these are projects that also require collaboration with the IT department, with the human resources department. So, they're about collaboration, but they require it as well.
Questions?
Yep. Including that's a fire pit, if you were wondering what that circle of sand is. It's in the National Museum of American Indian. Questions? Got a hand up over here. There's one there.
Thank you.
One of my questions is, it sounds like much of what you've dealt with has to do, not all, but operational expertise. Did you look at the published, I know that the institutes have researchers just like NIH or any other academic institution. Did you tap into their bibliographies, their publications, and out of standard databases and be able to resolve identity and those issues?
We didn't mention, we mentioned very briefly something called Smithsonian Research Online That's actually the official bibliography of the research of the institution. Pretty much it's intended to be all the published papers of the Smithsonian staff. Now, the libraries runs that. We're responsible for that project. We've been doing that for a couple of years now. So we do have, in a sense, some hold on the bibliography of the work that's being done, the published work that's being done. And it is a requirement if you're going for your peer review, which the scientists and the researchers all do go through, and the historians, that you have contributed your work to the bibliography. If you're not in the SRO, it doesn't exist. So that does give us the level of the professional achievement. What we don't know, because people publish perhaps in a very select area, is what they're also doing on the side. So the guy who is in fishes, who is an expert on truffles, and the person who is in music in American Indian Museum, because they're looking at particular tribal music, who may also be a musician who could contribute to music throughout the institution. It's that much more interdisciplinary level that's hard to identify. People self-identify in most cases, even in their publishing. So they might be, in fact, in 2 or 3 scientific areas. They might actually also be in history, art, and culture. We're sort of science, history, art, and culture. These are just some of the contacts and some of the sites. I think that we also control, at the moment, or try to control, the digital repository for the institution. That went, in fact, from nothing to almost 20,000 articles in the last 4 years. That requires us going out and really working with people, because there never was a requirement that you make a digital version of your material accessible. Now, these are the printed. On the science data side, there is no coordinated effort. It is only beginning now. People keep their data, their scientific data, in every form imaginable. I mean, people who go for big grants obviously have to file data management. People who don't go for grants, and not everyone has to in our environment, may have it in their computer, and it might be in their computer at home. And I've had senior scientists show me their file drawers of years of data. So that's an area the institution's only now tackling. But our questions are more this cross-disciplinary or more informal collaboration. So I'll give you an idea of some of the Grand Challenge projects that were mentioned. Music. Turns out, of course, there's music in every part of the institution, but people rarely had a chance to talk to each other. Immigration. Immigration isn't just about what American history does on the subject. I mean, there's a lot. Plastics, one of my favorite, goes clear across the institution. The Cooper Hewitt here in New York is very involved, because plastics are in the collection, plastic conservation, the study of plastics. What else? And then there are the big science topics. So we have one more over here, right? 2 more.
How is this initiative also impacted by public access collaboration like the Smithsonian Commons?
Well, we're going to try and work with them. I mean, certainly we do. Did you guys talk to Mike Edson or to the Commons?
We didn't.
No.
No. There was something that we were thinking about. We know that's out there. I guess it needs to be, as a concept, further developed before we can really step in. And there are some existing things that we can do with the use of SharePoint, or with our in-house Prism, and also we're looking into stuff like researcher ID. So there, but as far as within that kind of the Commons thing, that hasn't really been really adapted across the institution. So.
Okay, and then here, please.
So I was glad to hear you mention the repository, and excited to hear it's growing so quickly. I was curious. My understanding is that an initiative that's going on now is to actually leverage the repository to sort of have an active workspace for researchers for their research data and projects. And I was curious if that's presenting an opportunity to sort of have that, collaboration, awareness, and discoverability of people's, where they're doing their work, to help encourage that.
Are you speaking of a Smithsonian initiative in this area or the government research?
Yes, Thorny Staples just
Thorny.
presented
Okay,
it.
thank
Yeah.
you. That's what we needed was the name. Yes, definitely. And Thorny is important to what we're doing, and I hope at some point will be important to him. This is out of the central office of the Chief Information Officer. And it is, this project, as I mentioned, is there's been no standard way of sharing data. He is looking at two things right now. He's at the stage of a system to help researchers who are applying for grants know how to answer the data management requests. And then they are looking at ways to share data. And I believe you spoke with him.
Yeah, and basically that was actually my first idea, was to do something with the repository and somehow link up with the repository. But basically in the meetings that we had, it was just too early in both, it was too early to collaborate in both initiatives to really get something started now. So I think that's definitely something that's been brought up, but it's a next step or a third step kind of thing.
Well, we are talking to Thorny about a repository and having that maybe migrate into that environment, or at least be able to work better with that environment. So we're currently using DSpace, and we're going to look into using Drupal or something of that nature, so that data can be shared more easily with that.
And you've been very patient here.
I think we have to.
Should we take the one more and then we can wrap? We're within our...
I was just fascinated by what the two LIS students did, and I really held out to just comment how very, very important what you did must accomplish for your institution, but also for the profession. And I hope that you make your findings public in a way that will help us across disciplines, because this is where it is at. Whether you're a library or a research institution, to have a robust membership directory and to have implement knowledge sharing is critical in today's world in the 21st century. And thank you for sharing your findings.
The article is forthcoming.
Yeah.